Imagine stumbling across an old family chest in your attic, Dusty, creaking sealed for generations. You force it open, and inside, nestled between brittle letters and forgotten relics, is a faded family portrait. Everyone in the picture looks familiar, except one. A figure stoic, strong, and unknown stares back at you. That is the experience of meeting Denny, the Denisovan Neanderthal hybrid unearthed from the frozen shadows of Siberia. Her tiny bone fragment rewrote everything we thought we knew about our species. For decades, we believed Homo sapiens were the lone victors in the human saga, outliving, outsmarting, and replacing all others. But Denny reminds us, we weren't alone. Our story is not one of domination, but of contact, crossing, and complex kinship. As you step into prehistoric shadows, ask yourself, what other ancestors have we forgotten? And more importantly, what parts of you still carry their echoes? In the remote, glacier-carved wilds of southern Siberia long before borders or nations life was not quiet, the wind howled across the mountain valleys, carving ridges into ancient rock and whispering through the conifer forests like a language long forgotten. Nearly 100,000 years ago, this unforgiving land was home to a world unlike the one we know. It wasn't ruled by Homo sapiens, not yet. This was a crossroads of human ancestry where multiple branches of the human tree converged and coexisted. Neanderthals hunted game in the snow-covered forests, broad-shouldered and cold-adapted, armed with stone-tipped spears, and the knowledge passed through countless generations. Denisovans, more mysterious still, roamed these same highlands resilient, elusive, leaving behind barely a trace. And perhaps others too lost branches we've yet to discover, their names unknown, their bones scattered or gone forever. It wasn't a world of empires or cities, but make no mistake, it was a world of people. Tribes and kin groups moved through the region seasonally, following the migrations of animals, foraging for roots, berries, and shellfish when the land thawed in the brief Siberian summers. Fire was more than a toolet, was life itself. Stone tools clacked in practiced hands. Shelter meant warmth, and warmth meant survival. Caves weren't empty, they echoed with language, laughter, grief, and perhaps even song. Children were born under flickering firelight. The old passed on stories or at least memory before the ice took them. And in this world, in a cave now called Denisova, a girl was born. Half Neanderthal, half Denisovan. She would not live long, but her brief existence, preserved in a tiny sliver of bone, now whispers a story that stretches across millennia. A story of survival. A story of forgotten people. A story of us. Picture this. A 13-year-old girl walking barefoot across frost, hardened soil in a Siberian summer that still bites like winter. Her breath clouds the air as she steps carefully between stones, searching perhaps for shells, perhaps for meaning, or maybe simply to pass the time before returning to the warmth of her people's cave. She is unaware of her uniqueness, unaware that she is a bridge between worlds, unaware that her very blood carries a story science had long forgotten. She will not live to adulthood. Her life is short. Her death leaves little tracino art, no tools, no grave goods to remember her by. Only a single fragment remains. 2 centimeters of bone tucked in sediment and ice in a cave we would one day name Denisova. And in that sliver of fossilized youth, something extraordinary. DNA, ancient, preserved, and shockingly revealing. When scientists first extracted and sequenced it, they found something no one expected. This was no ordinary prehistoric girl. Her genome told a story that had never before been written in the annals of science. Her mother was Neanderthal, her father, Denisovan. Two distinct species thought to be evolutionary cousins had created life together. And Denny was the living, breathing proof of that union. She wasn't just a footnote in the tale of evolution, she was the narrative thread that bound two ancient tribes. Denny defied our neat classifications. She was not one or the other. She was both. And in that, she represented something profoundly human. Connection across difference. For millennia, we imagined our species Homo sapiensis singular, dominant, isolated in its success. But Denny challenges that myth. She reminds us that being human has always meant more than lineage. It meant kinship, even across evolutionary divides. This wasn't just a genetic discovery, it was a revelation about family. A girl whose existence reminds us that intimacy, curiosity, and the drive to belong existed long before history began. Denny didn't write her story, but her DNA wrote it for her. Tucked high in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, 700 meters above sea level, lies a cave with walls that have seen the rise and fall of countless worlds. Denisova Cave, as it came to be known, is not just a hole in the rock. It is a silent sentinel of time, layered with the dust of over 280,000 years of human occupation. Each centimeter of sedimentage, stone, bone, and ash, layerous, a page in a book we're only beginning to decipher. When excavations began in the 1970s, led by Russian paleontologist Nikolai Ovidov, the goal was modest, to find ancient remains of animals, particularly canines. What they found instead would shake the foundations of paleoanthropology. Over 22 distinct archaeological layers were identified strata that bridged epochs. From the Middle Paleolithic to the Iron Age, generations of humans and their ancestors had passed through this place. They left behind flint tools, burned wood, broken bones, and the occasional ornament of quiet testimony to daily life in the deep past. Yet it wasn't until 2008 that Denisova Cave revealed its greatest secret. Among this sediment, researchers found a fragment of a pinky bone. Roughly 2 centimeters long, weathered and unassuming, it was initially thought to belong to a modern human child who lived between 30,000 and 50,000 years ago. But deeper testing told a more astonishing tale. Genetic sequencing revealed the bone belonged not to a Homo sapiens, nor even a Neanderthal. It belonged to an entirely different lineage of humana population we had never encountered before. They were soon named the Denisovans, after the cave that had cradled their remains in near silence for millennia. That humble bone fragment didn't just add a new branch to the human family tree, it uprooted our assumptions. It proved that modern humans were not the only ones to inhabit this world in complexity. In a cave nestled far from civilization, a forgotten chapter of our shared story had quietly waited to be heard. And the cave still holds more. To this day, Denisova remains one of the most important prehistoric sites on Earth, because it reminds us that sometimes history isn't written in ink, but in bone, dust, and silence. For years, we believed the story of humanity began in earnest when Homo sapiens stepped out of Africa around 70,000 years ago. We imagined a triumphant journey across continents, a lonely species, venturing into a world untouched by others. But the bones and the soil of Denisova Cave tell a humbler, more intricate tale. Using a combination of radiocarbon dating, luminescence analysis, and stratigraphy, study of geological layering, scientists rewrote our timeline of human presence in Asia. Then, through ancient DNA extraction, they revealed not just presence, but persistence. The Denisovans weren't fleeting visitors to the Siberian mountains. They were long-term residents. Their genetic imprint and the tools found among the sediment reveal that these archaic humans had been living in the region at least 123,000 to 195,000 years ago. And there is compelling evidence to suggest they may have occupied Denisova cave and perhaps wider regions of Asia for over 280,000 years. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 3 times longer than the entire span of recorded human history. They hunted through ice ages and adapted to warming spells. They watched the landscape change, rivers freeze and thaw, animals migrate, forests vanish and reappear. They endured environmental chaos that would have tested even the most advanced civilizations today. And all of this before Homo sapiens had even left Africa. While we were still a localized species in the cradle of humanity, the Denisovans had already carved out a resilient existence across Eurasia. Their survival wasn't accidental. It was earned through adaptation, knowledge of the land, and perhaps even cultural continuity passed from parent to child over thousands of years. They were not evolutionary failures. They were masters of survival in a world without mercy. And their presence pushes the timeline of advanced hominin activity far deeper than most textbooks dared to imagine. They weren't waiting for us. They were already thriving. For most of our lives, we've been taught to think of early human species as strangers or worse, rivals locked in a struggle for dominance, like separate armies marching across prehistory. But in the caves and river valleys of Eurasia, the truth was far more intimate. From around 190,000 to 97,000 years ago, 2 distinct branches of humanity, Neanderthals and Denisovans, did more than just coexist. They lived side by side. They breathed the same cold mountain air, shared the same animal trails, likely hunted together and, perhaps most tellingly, sought shelter in the same caves, like the one at Denisova. And in one remarkable instance, we know that their closeness extended beyond cooperation. It became union. Around 90,000 to 100,000 years ago, a girl named Denny was born. Her DNA, a perfect 50-50th split between a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She wasn't an anomaly. She was a product of something deeply human: contact, trust, and the crossing of boundaries. This was not just about mating. This was about mingled lives communities, sharing firelight, food, and perhaps even language. To produce viable offspring, these groups had to be more than biologically compatible. They had to be close, in proximity and in culture. This suggests that they understood each other at a level deeper than instinct. They likely exchanged skills, tools, and maybe even beliefs. Fires were built not far apart, but together. Knowledge of game, seasons, healing herbs, and flint knapping may have passed across the invisible borders between their peoples. The story of Denny reveals more than a chance encounter. It unveils a world where humanity wasn't divided by walls of species, but united by the timeless need to survive and to connect. In a way, it is not just a story of biology. It's a story of kinship. And in the soft shadows of Denisova Cave, those ancient sparks of contact still burn. We like to imagine human evolution as a simple, branching tree, each species splitting off cleanly, one giving rise to the next, and the rest fading into extinction. But the truth, uncovered through ancient DNA, paints a far messier, far more fascinating picture. It's not a tree. It's a tapestry woven, tangled, and layered with threads from ancestors we never even knew existed. Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens didn't evolve in isolation. They were part of a shared ecosystem, and their genes flowed between one another in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about separate species. We already know that Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred. We know that modern humans carry fragments of their DNA to this day. But deeper, still buried in the very genetic makeup of Denisovans, something even older. Roughly 4% of the Denisovan genome comes from a group known only by their legacy, the superarchaics. These hominins diverged from the human family tree more than 1 million years ago, before Neanderthals, before Homo heidelbergensis, before even Homo erectus had reached Asia. They were truly ancient, and yet they interbred with the ancestors of Denisovans and Neanderthals around 700,000 years ago, leaving behind echoes of themselves that would persist for hundreds of millennia. Imagine that. Carrying in your body the genetic fingerprint of a people who lived 1 million years before you were born. It redefines what ancestry really means. These weren't just long-lost cousins. They were woven into our very foundation. Every Denisovan who ever lived carried pieces of that superarchaic codand through their interbreeding with Homo sapiens. So do we. It is a reminder that evolution is not linear. It's recursive. Genes loop, mix, and resurface, sometimes thousands of generations later. We are not the product of a single lineage, but the consequence of contact, the survivors of fusion, the inheritors of ghosts. In every cell, the story continues. For years, the name Denisovan was tethered to a single cave in the icy heart of Siberia. It was easy to assume they were localized mystery ghosts trapped in stone, bound to the Altai Mountains. But ancient bones and modern genes have rewritten that assumption completely. In 2019, everything changed. A partial jawbone, weathered by time and altitude, was discovered in the Baishia Karst cave on the Tibetan plateau over 2,700 kilometers from Denisova Cave. It had been unearthed decades earlier by a Buddhist monk and sat quietly in a monastery until modern science came knocking. When researchers finally sequenced the collagen proteins and compared its morphology, they reached a stunning conclusion. This was Denisovan, a cousin to the people of Siberia, yes, but not a clone. This jawbone was adapted to high-altitude living, with robust features built for the thin, oxygen-starved air of Tibet. It was the first direct proof that Denisovans were not confined to Siberia. They were continent-spanning, stretching from the mountains of Central Asia to the islands of the South Pacific. The picture grew even more intricate when geneticists began analyzing DNA from modern human populations in Southeast Asia and Oceania. They found Denisovan ancestry scattered like stardust across modern Genomezan, Indonesians, Papuans, Fijians, Aboriginal Australians, and more. But here's the kicker. These weren't all from one ancient population. The data revealed at least 3 major Denisovan lineages, each diverging around 250,000 years ago. One group settled in mainland Southeast Asia, modern-day Thailand and Vietnam. Another spread throughout Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. And the third, the original Siberian line, remained rooted in the north. One Denisovan-derived lineage found in Papuan populations is so genetically distinct. Some scientists argue it may represent an entirely separate species, not just a regional variation. No fossils have yet been found for this branch, but the genetic divergence is as profound as that between Neanderthals and modern humans. Think about that. An entire shadow species, hiding in the bloodstream of modern people, waiting to be confirmed by bone. These findings reshape our understanding of ancient humans. Denisovans weren't a single group tucked away in a cave. They were adaptable, wide-ranging, and genetically diverse forgotten civilization that walked the peaks, crossed the seas, and left their mark on a continent. They didn't just survive. They thrived, quietly shaping the biological map of Asia long before we arrived. What if all you had to reconstruct a lost people were a few teeth, part of a skull, and a pinky finger? That's all the Denisovans left us fragments. And yet, from those remnants, a remarkable picture emerges. Not because the bones told us everything on their own, but because modern science listened to the whispers hidden in ancient DNA. Using cutting-edge techniques like DNA methylation mapping, researchers were able to infer how genes were expressed in Denisovan tissues. This doesn't just tell us what genes they had. It tells us how those genes shaped their physical form, the slope of their forehead, the width of their cheeks, the robustness of their jaw. The result? A face that was wide and flat, with a projecting midface, a large, flaring nose built to warm the freezing air of the Siberian highlands. Their forehead slanted back, less rounded than ours, and their jaw was powerful, built for processing a rugged diet. The molars, especially the third, were huge, even larger than those of Neanderthals, rivaling the size of much older human ancestors like Homo habilis or Australopithecus. Such teeth weren't for aesthetics. They were tools, built to grind down tough, fibrous plant material roots. Nuts, seed sand tear through raw meat, possibly even bone. They likely foraged and hunted, supplementing their diet with cold water fish from nearby rivers, just 28 meters from their cave dwelling. Their bodies were compact and muscular, with wide rib cages and hips. This wasn't just about strength, it was about survival. A shorter, stockier frame conserves heat more effectively, vital for enduring the subarctic climate of Ice Age Siberia. In some reconstructions, they stand shorter than modern humans, but more densely built like a wrestler trained by nature itself. Importantly, their cranial volume is estimated to be similar to, or even larger than, that of modern humans in par with Neanderthals. This doesn't necessarily mean they were more intelligent, but it suggests a rich sensory and spatial awareness, crucial for tracking prey, navigating dense forests, and surviving long winters. They were not cavemen in the crude, outdated sense. They were engineered by evolution to thrive where others couldn't. And from a handful of bones, their ghost has taken on a face, again not a monster, not a myth, but a mirror from our deeper past. Long after the last Denisovan bone turned to dust, their story lives on it in relics, but in us. Unlike other species that vanished without a trace, Denisovans left behind a genetic footprint that still marches through the cells of millions of modern humans. Their bones are rare. Their legacy is not. Today, Denisovan DNA is detectable across the globe, albeit in varying amounts. Populations in East Asia and the Americas carry around 0.2%, while in Oceania, particularly among Aboriginal Australians, Papuans, and some Polynesian groups, the figure jumps to as high as 6%. And these aren't meaningless strands of DNA buried in some obscure chromosome. They matter. One Denisovan gene variant, EPAS1, is a biological marvel. It helps Tibetans thrive in the thin, oxygen-depleted air of the high Himalayas. Without it, the body struggles at altitudes over 13,000 feet. With it, hearts pump more efficiently. Lungs adapt. Life becomes sustainable where others wheeze. In Inuit populations, other Denisovan genes affect fat metabolism, enhancing the body's ability to endure extreme cold and high-fat diets, derived from marine mammals and Arctic game. And it doesn't stop there. A segment of Denisovan DNA has been linked to lip thickness in both Native American and East Asian population, a trait once brushed aside as superficial, now understood as a functional adaptation to environmental exposure and dietary needs. These inherited traits don't define who we are. They simply prove where we came from. They show us that Evolution isn't just about survival in the past, it's about influence in the present. And while some may search for meaning in the shape of a nose or the size of a molar, the real significance lies deeper. These genetic legacies are survival codes etched into our biology, enabling humans to thrive in deserts, jungles, mountaintops, and tundra. Denisovan DNA doesn't make anyone better or worse. It simply reminds us that we are composites, shaped by unions forged in caves under the northern sky. They are not just our past, they are our resilience made flesh. Roughly 14,500 years ago, the Denisovans faded from the fossil record. But their story didn't end there. Even as they vanished as a distinct people, their genes lived on, woven into the lineage of modern humans like faint echoes in our blood. So what happened to them? Why did a hominin group so widespread from the caves of Siberia to the Tibetan Plateau and the islands of Melanesia disappear from view? There's no definitive answer. Some scientists point to climate shifts. The end of the Pleistocene brought dramatic environmental upheavals. Others highlight the emergence and expansion of Homo sapiens, whose toolsets, social structures, and adaptability may have outpaced or outcompeted older populations. Or perhaps it wasn't extinction at all. Perhaps it was assimilation not through war, but through love, family, and generations of shared life. The archaeological record offers fragments. The genetic record offers clues. But the full story remains shrouded in time, as much philosophy as science. And here at Prehistoric Shadows, we argue that the disappearance of the Denisovans is not a tale of loss, but of legacy. They were not eradicated. They were absorbed, welcomed, transformed. They became part of the human mosaic. Their genes whisper in the lungs of Tibetan shepherds, echo in the immune responses of Pacific Islanders, and dwell quietly within millions who will never know their names. They are not forgotten. They are us. Their existence challenges the outdated notion that humanity is a linear march toward modernity. Instead, they remind us that we are branches from a thick forest, not just one isolated trunk. Our species is a result of entanglement, of divergence and reconnection, of unlikely unions in dark caves beneath glacial skies. And in that entanglement lies beauty, complexity, and a deeper truth. Human identity is not homogeneous. It is a grand chorus of ancestors, sung in many voices. So when we say the Denisovans disappeared, perhaps we should correct ourselves. They persisted, just not in the way we expected. And they left behind not bones but questions, the kind that pull us deeper into the shadows. It began with a 2-centimeter fragment of fossilized bone. Not a monument, not a manuscript, just a sliver of a finger, nestled in ancient sediment within a shadowy cave in Siberia. And yet, that tiny piece of a long-dead girl did what entire libraries of theory could not. It rewrote the human story. That bone whispered of a world where species overlapped, where bloodlines merged across evolutionary divides, and where survival didn't always mean outcompeting. Sometimes it meant embracing. Deni wasn't an anomaly. She was evidence. Proof that our ancestry isn't a straight line, but a braided river one where Neanderthals, Denisovans, and early Homo sapiens all converged. We, the so-called modern humans, are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are inheritors. Inherited nomads shaped not only by tools and language, but by countless acts of migration, interbreeding, and shared survival. Denisovans are not a prehistoric side note. They are a central chapter, a vivid illustration of how human resilience has always been interwoven with diversity. And here's what few realize. These ancient cousins weren't just survivors. As GLASP research notes, they were creators. Archaeologists discovered a greenstone bracelet and a bone needle in Denisova cavadelicate items made over 40,000 years ago. These weren't utilitarian scraps. They were symbolic, possibly even ceremonial. They show us a different picture, a people capable of not just existing but expressing, capable of meaning, capable of beauty. This challenges everything we thought we knew. So what else waits behind the veil of time? What stories still linger in the bones, the dust, and the DNA? If you've felt that pull toward the ancient unknown, subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows. Here, we go beyond textbooks. We walk into the caves. We chase the echoes. We unearth forgotten truths. Because the past doesn't lie silent, it waits. Behind every shadow, there's light to be found. And the more we learn about them, the more we learn about ourselves.